Well, this is Ed Stetzer Live, and I'm Ed Stetzer, your host. Listen every Saturday at this time. Well, I say Saturday, but I know that a whole lot of you listen via podcast. So if you're listening Thursday at 2 a.m., we're glad you're here too. It's Saturday for the rest of us when we're live on terrestrial radio, about 250 outlets across the country, and of course, listening online, as some of you do as well. Ed Stetzer Live is a production of Moody Radio, which is a ministry of Moody Bible Institute. We also have partners and affiliates all around the country. So we're thankful to be here with you today. I'm Ed Stetzer. I'm the Dean of the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. And I've been serving there for coming up on 3 years and got to know some colleagues during that time, and one of whom I'm going to introduce you in just a moment. Remember, we're going to take your calls. We're going to talk about suffering today. And that's, it's interesting. That's a topic that I think everybody sort of knows that they're going to walk through, they're going to address. Sometimes we don't like to talk about it. Sometimes maybe we should talk about it. But how we talk about it really does matter. So my guest today is Liz Hall. She's a professor, Dr. Liz Hall. She's a professor of psychology at Rosemead School of Psychology at Biola University, where she teaches courses on the integration of psychology and theology. She's published over 100 articles and book chapters and serves as associate editor of Psychology of Religion and Spirituality. She also co-authored Rational Spirituality with her husband, Todd. Liz, thank you for joining us on the program today.
It's really great to be here today, Ed.
Well, good. We're going to have a good conversation today because it's a topic that everybody has some stake in the game, that kind of conversation in and around suffering. The title of your new book is When the Journey Hurts, Finding Meaning in Suffering. I'm not sure. I have a subtitle. It says Finding Meaning in Suffering in Heart, Mind, and Soul. Am I saying that correctly, Liz?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
accurate.
good. Okay, good. I wasn't sure because suffering in heart, mind, and soul. I was not sure if it was of or in. Anyway, great to have you on the program, and I think it's interesting because I look at your book. First of all, it's not what to be honest, it's not what I expected, because everyone who writes a book on suffering wants to address the why question. At least kind of in my world. My world's kind of a pastor-facing world, and pastors are mostly helping people to address the why. But you don't address the why. I mean, you don't try to make it the focus of the book. It's sort of the how and how you walk through suffering. And sometimes people talk about suffering well, or suffering and leaning in on God's grace and presence. A lot of ways to express that. So why write a book on the how rather than the why?
Oh, you've opened up a huge can of worms there. a bit of a soapbox for me. I mean, it stems back to my own experience going through cancer about 13 years ago, and people tried to be helpful, of course, as they are, and they would hand me books, and I love reading. I'd read them, and the books. It seems like almost the only thing they talked about was the why. And frankly, to be just very honest here, I could not care less about the why. I
Hmm.
was just really concerned with the how. And I could not find good resources for getting through the how. So part of the answer to your question is simply that that's the side of the equation that's been neglected. When we Christians these days think about having a theology of suffering, we think about the why question. And interestingly, that's not a question that seems to be the focus of what our Bible talks about. And so I think, in a way, we're trying to bring a bit of balance to the equation by addressing this part that seemed to be of primary importance to the biblical authors, actually.
Yeah, no question. And it's interesting because I think for us, we live in an age where like everything is designed to help us avoid discomfort and suffering. I'm sitting in a house right now in my studio, and it's air conditioned, right? So, this is something that nobody had, 50 years ago. And, I get into a car that has comfortable seats. I mean, everything is created to help us to avoid discomfort or any level of suffering. Whereas, people in Bible days or people 100 years ago, I mean, remember 100 years ago, nobody had a hot shower. It's like, so everything that we have created is to help us to avoid discomfort and suffering. Yet it just seems to be assumed in a way that, as you mentioned, the Bible authors are just like, we're in a world of suffering. How do we cope? What's the how that comes with it? But so in the book, you sort of point to suffering. I want to use the term leaning in. I don't use that term, but leaning into suffering can actually help you grow in different ways. So help me unpack how, because I'm no fan of suffering, Liz, if that's okay. I'm just no fan of it. But you kind of, by the time I read the book, I'm like, okay, maybe I need some more, but no, I don't want some more. So how can it help us in our growth?
Yeah, you're pointing to this reality that we're so influenced by our culture, even in the way that we do church, the way that we do theology, we're influenced by our culture, and so we have changed our orientation, the ways that we think about suffering, where instead of just seeing it as part of life, as I think many of our ancestors did, it is something that it we think that we've successfully avoided it, and then boom, it just hits us out of nowhere, and we have stopped seeing it as opportunities that God brings into our life. If we think that the entire point of the Christian life is to draw closer to God, then clearly that's the answer to why we would want to engage well with suffering too, is because it turns out that this is something that God can use in some fairly unique ways to draw us closer to Him. And so that's kind of the bottom line. Of course, there's all kinds of pathways for getting there, all kinds of ways in which suffering does that. But I think that's the bottom line, is that God can use suffering, and sometimes even in ways beyond other areas of our life, to really engage us, to draw our attention, and then to pull us into the kind of relationship that we're meant for with God, one of dependency and one of intimacy.
Yeah, yeah. It's a co-author book as well. And by the way, if you want to get the book, and I want to encourage you to do so, go to edstetzerlive.com and you can click on it. And right in there, it lists Liz Hall. She's actually M. Elizabeth Lewis Hall, but we call her Dr. Liz Hall around Biola. But you can click there and you purchase the book right through the website, so it's easy to find. edstetzerlive.com. But tell us, it's three of you wrote this together, and tell them about the journey of writing about suffering with a team of people.
Yeah, it has been quite a journey. So I mentioned that I was diagnosed with cancer way back in 2013. God used that particular journey to change the focus of my research. So I came out of that committed to helping people to not be quite as lost as I had been at the beginning of that journey. And so, just as we academics do, we got a few grants, accumulated a team. I knew this had to be interdisciplinary work, and so we had some theologians, a couple theologians and a philosopher, and a couple more psychologists. And we've just since then been working away at this journey of helping Christians with what in psychology we call meaning making coping. And so done a lot of academic work. And then we looked around and said, hey, we know a lot of stuff that we didn't at the beginning of our journey. We really should now make this accessible to people in the pews. And so that was what this book was about. And so out of our team, the two theologians came on board to write it with me. So one is Dr. Jason McMartin, who is a colleague at Biola. He has joint appointments in your school, Ed, at Talbot, as well as Rosemead, where he teaches our doctoral students theology. And then Kelly Kapic at Covenant was the other partner in that. And so, again, we have done academic research, tons of it over the past 10 years, published in all kinds of academic journals, psychology, theology, philosophy, but none of these were making its way into really what was the heart of my starting on this journey so many years ago, which are people facing tough times and being kind of unsure about what the Christian faith was guiding them to do during those times.
Yeah, so good. I'm glad you wrote this, and I'm glad that, with Kelly and Jason as well. Our phone number, because I know you're going to want to ask questions about this, and maybe you're in a season of suffering, and how might we cope? How might we find meaning making, as Liz just talked about a minute ago? Again, Dr. Liz Hall is our guest. The book is When the Journey Hurts, Finding Meaning in Suffering in Heart, Mind, and Soul. Our phone number for your calls is 877-548-3675. I should say we got several copies of the book to give away. It's not like, hey, I'm the seventh caller, like, back when you were a kid calling in the radio station. It's bring some insightful questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you and I give away a few copies of the book. It's 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. Okay. Suffering well is, I'm trying to remember who I first heard use that language. It might, I think I know it's been around for a while. It might have been Matt Chandler when he was first diagnosed with brain cancer. He said, Lord, help me to suffer well. We just happen to be friends. In fact, he was on the program last week. So if you're interested, you can go to edstetzerlive.com and listen to the program from last week's. But you kind of tell us to avoid some false narratives about suffering, if we're going to suffer well, which guess even the phrase "suffer well" is such a strange phrase, but it's so packed with meaning. So I like it. But what are some things we need to avoid?
So again, I'm picking up here on some of the messages that I had to deal with when I was going through cancer. Some pressures
Mhm.
that were coming. I'm not going to say my church necessarily, but just having grown up in the church over the years, some messages about the way that I should, in a sense, face my suffering that I think were not very helpful. So one of them was just the vacuum of concrete guidance, and so I think sometimes the messages that are given to us are too vague. And, we interviewed, as part of our research, we interviewed almost 100 people with cancer and a couple of other groups of folks going through tough times as well. And the verse, of course, that came up again and again when we asked about what they drew from in their faith, was Romans 8:28. This idea that God can bring good out of bad things, but interestingly, for a lot of people, their understanding of what the Bible said about suffering stopped and ended with that verse. And it
Mm.
didn't even extend to the rest of Romans 8, which is packed full of some just really profound guidance and comfort around the topic of suffering. So, just in the next verse or two, it talks about conformity to Christ's image, and it talks about, in a sense, our growing into our adoption as sons and daughters of God. So the first thing is that I confronted was just that idea that there wasn't much concrete advice that was given to me. Um, the second one is, I think, perhaps the most pervasive problem. It People seem to really resonate with this one when we talk about it, and it's the idea that the church emphasizes a kind of triumphalism in how we face suffering,
Mm.
that we're supposed to, just kind of radiate joy, and we're supposed to claim triumph, and the fact that we are actually, in pieces and suffering and experiencing all kinds of really difficult emotions. It feels almost like a failure of faith. We must be doing something wrong if we are actually feeling bad.
Mm.
And so a lot of people feel pressured that they have to, jump to starting to find silver linings and the thing that God is bringing into, the growth that God is wanting from them, and claiming victory and finding joy in suffering and all these things, when really they just want to scream and howl and express the distress that they're in. And so somewhere along the way, we've picked up this idea that what a good way of facing suffering in is just ignoring our suffering. And of course, the book throughout we combat that idea, and this profoundly unbiblical idea, I would say. The third problematic area is the one that we've touched on briefly before, that people are offered resources that simply have to do with defending God. Um, I Even when I was interacting with people, sometimes their first response would be, "It's yeah, sometimes it's hard to see why God would allow things like this." And it was such a miss in terms of how I was feeling. Again, I was not worried about how God might have been involved or not involved in bringing or allowing the cancer into my life. I wanted comfort. I didn't want
Mhm.
abstract philosophical things about why God would do this. And so I think a lot of the ways that the resources were offered are just, frankly, the word I use is defensive. They're defensive
Mm.
of God. They're trying to defend God's goodness or power or justice. And I wasn't worried about those things. And we have discovered that a lot of other people aren't really worried about those things either. So those are some of the things that we get from our Christian culture that I think are not particularly helpful.
Yeah, and so good. I want to deal more with that, and we need to take just a moment. When we do come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Liz Hall. Her book is When the Journey Hurts: Finding Meaning in Suffering for Heart, Mind, and Soul. I did say in heart, mind, and soul. That's what threw me off, Liz. It's for heart, mind, and soul. Our phone number is 877-548-3675. Jump on the line, give us a call. Let's talk about suffering, because we need to talk about suffering. 877-548-3675. All right, we're back at Stetzer Live. I'm your host and glad to be here to continue our conversation. I don't know if I said earlier, I'm the Dean of the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. I think I did say that. I work with Dr. Liz Hall at Biola University. She said earlier that I'm in this school, she's in that school. In university parlance, there's the school called Biola University, and then there are schools within the schools. So Dr. Hall's at what's called Rosemead. That's our School of Psychology. I'm at the School of Theology. So we get to have these conversations. She actually teaches in and around how these things relate to one another, psychology and theology as well. This book is an example of collaboration around that. Kind of excited about this conversation because of those things. Our phone number is 877-548-3675. I'm not surprised that we have several of you on the line. I tell pastors that, kind of there's in our culture, it's a bit countercultural to talk about suffering. But I think when you do, you have the attention of the entire congregation because everyone either is in suffering, coming out of suffering, or soon going into suffering. Suffering seems to be a universal human constant that we sort of avoid. And I think pastors and churches would do well to lean into some of that conversation as well. All right, so we're going to take your calls and just kind of talk about some of these things. Let's go to James. James, you're in North Carolina. You're live on the air, James. Go ahead with your question or your comment.
Oh, good God. After morning, it's morning where you are. It's noon where I am.
It is indeed, James. Jump right with your question or your comment, though.
I've always wondered, the Apostle Paul talked about sharing in the Lord's sufferings. Do we suffer? But when we suffer, do we share in his sufferings, or did he suffer so we wouldn't have to suffer?
That's a good question, James. If you'll hold on the line, too, I want to give you a copy of the book that talks, of course, it leans in on these questions. When the Journey Hurts, Finding Meaning in Suffering for Heart, Mind, and Soul. And Liz, actually, you go through these 7 things, and you sort of address Christ's suffering in this. So go ahead and unpack that for us.
Yeah, I'm so glad, James, that you brought that up. It's actually one of the big discoveries that I made going through this research, that idea of participating in Christ's sufferings. So the book of Philippians in chapter 3 talks about that. And in fact, Paul talks in one of the translations about it as joining the fellowship of Christ's suffering, which I think is a really lovely phrase. So, I don't know that there's anything automatic about that. So when Paul talks about this desire to participate in Christ's suffering, it makes it sound like it's not just, well, he suffered, we suffer, and boom, we're sharing in the sufferings. I think it's more that we can use our sufferings for a particular purpose that God has for it, which is to allow us to draw closer to Jesus. That there's a way in which, when we have suffered betrayal and physical anguish and all of those other things that our Lord went through on earth, that there's a way in which, just like people who have maybe gone through a war together, or gone through a sports team together, that there's kind of a commonality there, that we can use that shared experiences to draw closer to Jesus in a way that we couldn't otherwise. And this allows us even to learn how to suffer more the way that Jesus did. It allows us to do some of the things that Jesus did better, in terms of things like compassion for others and that kind of thing. Christians over the ages have actually developed spiritual practices to try to cultivate this. In my corner of the conservative Protestant world, we have not done this very much, which is, I think, why this was such a surprise to us. But in a recent study, what we had people do is draw on an ancient form of prayer called imaginative prayer, where we instructed them each day to look at a biblical passage that describes some difficult event that Jesus went through, and to imaginatively place themselves in that story, and then use that to connect their suffering to Christ's suffering. And what people reported when we interviewed them after they did this for a month is how transformative it was, how much closer they felt to Jesus and to God, how much more they felt God's presence in the midst of their suffering. They felt like Jesus really understood what they were going through. And so it turns out that this kind of ancient series of practices based on what Paul tells us we can do when we identify with Christ's suffering is something that's available to us when we're going through hard times. I think one of the beautiful things it does is it takes suffering that can feel so meaningless and it actually gives it a purpose. When we can use our suffering for that really amazing purpose of drawing closer to Jesus, it transforms the suffering itself.
Yeah, I love that. And you had these 7 practices for suffering well. We meant the first one was identifying with Christ's suffering. I think we'll probably hit on the others as some of the calls go through. I want to make sure we do because I was particularly touched by a couple of them, and we'll kind of walk through that as well. But let's go to June in Chicago. June, you're listening on WMBI. You're live on the air. What's your question or your comment?
Now, I just wanted to share a testimony.
Please.
The first time I had cancer was in 2003. Then it came back in 2014, breast cancer. So, like last month, within the last 2 months, they found out that the cancer had spread it all through my body. It's in my throat, my liver. It's in my lung. So anyway, I'm in treatment now. So the way I see it, I'm trusting God. Because I know what God did in 2003 in my body. I know what He did in 2014. So I'm still walking by faith. And a lot of people looking at me kind of funny, like they saying, one lady said, if I was you, I'd be home in the bed crying now. And even my doctors, because they were saying how my skin lit up, and now then he said, you want to see it? I said, yeah, so I got a lot of hot spots all through my body. I'm in treatment, and I'm trusting God, to heal my body. So in 3 months, I'm supposed to get another scan, and they say we're going to see how the hot spots is dim, because they're real bright. And they were saying if it's working, it's going to dim, the cancer going to kill it. I mean, the medication going to kill it. And it's still breast cancer, because that was the main thing. And they did surgery on me because I had fluid in my lungs. And then they did this procedure where they put like glue. They glue my lungs back to the wall. So
oh my, June, that's a lot. You're going through a lot of treatment for sure. Well, but I do love your focus here on trusting the Lord in the midst of this, walking by faith in the midst of this. If you'll hold on for just a second, I want to give you a copy of Liz's new book, When the Journey Hurts: Finding Meaning in Suffering for Heart, Mind, and Soul. And it sounds like, Liz, that she's actually working to find that meaning and to trust the Lord. I know when I look through your 7 things, that kind of reminded me maybe of surrender. But talk to us how trusting the Lord in the midst of this fits.
Yeah, no, I actually was thinking the exact same thing. Thanks so much for sharing your experiences with us. I actually think that you are demonstrating really beautifully one of the other practices we talk about here, which is surrender. Sometimes in our culture, the word surrender has a pretty negative connotation. We might think of in the context of war, when somebody's back is up against the wall and they have to kind of admit defeat and surrender. But the biblical picture of surrender, again, is beautifully illustrated by what you just talked about, because it's motivated by love. It's when we are fully recognizing that a loving God who has good purposes for us is big enough to handle whatever we give him. And so in love, we entrust it to God. And the other thing that is really characteristic of surrender is that sometimes we think of surrender as kind of a passive thing. There's a phrase that we bandy about in Christian circles, let go and let God. And, it has some uses, but I think sometimes what it does is it communicates that all you have to do is just kind of flop down on the floor and be completely passive while God does everything. And the biblical picture has always been that in this kind of almost magical way, we collaborate isn't the right word, but we do what God has entrusted us to do. We fight injustice and suffering in our world, and then we know that God is at work. So I appreciate you hearing that not only are you trusting God, which is the surrender part, you're giving it to God because you've seen God act powerfully in your life in the past. But it sounds like you're also participating actively in your treatments. You are working with the doctors. And I think in situations such as yours, that's what we're called not to passivity, but to doing our part, while God is, of course, the one who is ultimately in charge of everything. And the thing about surrender, and I think I hear that even in the tone of your voice, is that it can bring really a lot of peace, even in the midst of what sounds like very, very difficult circumstances. So again, thanks for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, June, we actually were texting. My producer and I were texting about how much we appreciated your joy in the midst of that as well. So you're an encouragement, and we're praying for you as well. Let me remind you, we've got 2 more segments with Dr. Liz Hall. Her book is When the Journey Hurts. We're going to take your calls, 877-548-3675. You can see why I love working at Biola University. I have people like Dr. Hall and others who are helping us think about these important questions. And this important book will help you as well. Again, our phone number for your calls, 877-548-3675. All right, hey, we're back at Stetzer Live. We're talking to Dr. Liz Hall and about her new book, When the Journey Hurts, Finding Meaning and Suffering for Heart, Mind, and Soul. And again, if you go to edstetzerlive.com, the link's right there. Let me encourage you to pick up a copy of the book. I mean, this is so at the heart of where all of us walk through at some point, some season of suffering as well. So how do we address these things? Let's go to Wilma in Alabama for her question or comment. Wilma, you're live in the air. Go right ahead.
Hello there. Thank you for taking my call.
Glad to do it.
My husband has nerve damage with a lot of pain, and he has limited mobility. And in spite of trying different medications, we've had very little relief from the pain, and have pursued many medical possibilities with disappointing results. And now he's looking for hope, and I'm looking for ways to encourage him.
Yeah, well, Wilma, hold on just a second. We're going to give you a copy of the book, and I hope that'll be a help. It's When the Journey Hurts, Finding Meaning and Suffering for Heart, Mind, and Soul. But talk to us a little bit about that, Liz. I mean, this is chronic, ongoing, and, we're not the only, right now, some people might experience suffering and might be going in or going out of it, but some people experience a life of suffering. She's got this ongoing situation with her husband, nerve pain. What advice would you have?
Yeah, chronic pain, it's something that afflicts a huge percentage of Americans these days in various forms. And so it sounds like a very, very difficult situation, Willa. To start off with, I would say that the primary way that you can help him is to be with him in his suffering. And the primary biblical message you can point to is that God through Christ is with him in his suffering. And so presence. I don't think we ever want to underestimate the importance of God's presence with us, in our pain and our suffering. So aside from that, let me tell you about a study that we completed. I mentioned this practice of identifying with Christ's suffering. One of the other practices that we looked at was the practice of lament. So a huge percentage of the Psalms in the Bible, roughly 40% of them, are psalms in which that take a distinctive form in which the psalmist does a lot of kind of loud complaining to God. The psalmists pour out their heart in kind of raw honesty to God. And then at the end of the psalm, return to God with expressions of praise and confidence. And that's a kind of prayer that I think we're slowly trying to reclaim in our culture today. And it's a very important one, I think, in the context of what your husband is going through. One of the studies that we did on lament was with people who experience chronic pain, actually. And so what we had them do is we would send them a psalm of lament every day for a month. And we had them pray through it and think through it with a couple of prompts. And we learned that there was meaningful change for them at the end of it. Now, of course, that the nerve damage is not something that can be necessarily fixed with that, but it turns out from a psychological perspective that the relationship we have with our pain can actually change. And when the relationship we have with our pain changes, then our entire experience of it changes. So through the biblical practice of lament, what our sufferers found is that they were able to sleep better. They found that the pain interfered less with their life functioning, and they reported overall feeling better. And so there might be this particular practice that might be helpful to your husband where he feels that he can actually turn to God and express how terrible it feels to be constantly in pain, experience that God is there with him, and then turn to hope in the way that the Psalms of Lament so beautifully do.
Yeah, so good. I do think it's interesting that even as you describe some of these things, you keep saying we sent this to these people. So obviously, it's going to be a strange thing, but we explain a little bit to the audience that this wasn't just 7 ideas that you thought were good and important. Though again, as a pastor, I literally do that. I go through the text and find 7 things. But talk to us a little bit how these practices related to research that you engaged in the process.
Yeah, that was really one of the very fun things in having this interdisciplinary team with both psychologists and theologians on it. So, one of the things that psychology helps us to do is to be very, very practical, right? There might be advice or practices that are given us in the Bible. And so, what we psychologists then do is we say, how can we develop a program that will help people to actually do this? And then we get to kind of evaluate it. We get to use kind of these skills that have been built up through God's grace, really, in the field of psychology, to say, does this way that we put it together, does it actually help people? And so then we recruit people from around the country. There's ways built up of tapping into people who are willing to participate in these types of studies. And we, give them some questionnaires to fill out beforehand, and then we send them the practices through their phones, and then we contact them again at the end, and we give them more surveys to complete, and then we go online with them and interview them about their experiences. And so this is all part of that collaboration that we did between the psychologists on the team and the theologians and philosopher on the team.
Fascinating. And in the process of doing so, I mentioned 7 practices before. Let me just list them quickly so everyone's aware. We've already talked about number 1, identifying with Christ's suffering. Number 2 is lament. You talked some about that. Number 3, we talked about surrender. We haven't talked as much about 4 is forgiveness, 5 is gratitude, 6 is memento mori. I want to talk about that one, remembering your mortality, and 7 is weaving your story into God's story. But I want to make sure we get to the questions that people have as well. Let's go to Philip, listening on KWES down in Florida. Philip, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Yes, I really appreciate your program. It's really timely. My wife has been diagnosed with lymphomic cancer. We've been in and out of the hospital now 6 times since January. She's my wife is a pastor, and we're very, very busy doing, church work. And with her situation, I know the scripture says that he won't put on us more than we can bear, but we find ourselves at that point. Not that we don't have faith in God, but that we just are, saying, we got a church to take care of, and without her by my side, it's very difficult. So one of the things that I want to know is, is it stretching our faith? I know Job went through what he went through, and then he had twice as much at the end of his circumstance. But what do you think that we should be focusing on at this particular point of her illness, as you had
Philip,
your illness?
Yeah. Let me just say, Philip, I'm so sorry you're walking through this. And what's your wife's name, Philip?
Cindy.
Cindy, and for Cindy in particular, and just know of our prayers as you kind of walk through this. I can imagine it's a lot. I mean, I just appreciate your transparency and honesty. If you'll hold on, we want to give you a copy of When the Journey Hurts: Finding Meaning and Suffering for Heart, Mind, and Soul. But Liz, what advice would you have? I mean, here's a pastor walking through this suffering. What advice would you have for Philip and Cindy?
Oh man, my heart is heavy hearing about that story. So, I am really interested in how your question seems to be about what God is accomplishing through this, and whether it's supposed to be a test of your faith. And I wonder if that isn't part of the pressure of being a pastor and trying to lead a congregation while at the same time you are facing your own personal tragedy and trying to walk through your wife as she faces this tragedy in her own life. And I wonder if the focus should be on, is God stretching my faith, or whether the focus could be on you just trying to be honest with God about where you are. And it sounds like when you talk about stretching your faith, it sounds like there might be some struggles there. And I guess the thing that I want to communicate most clearly to you is that that is okay. As we look at the biblical witness, again, I would point you to the book of Psalms, where David, the man after God's own heart, seems to very openly struggle with God and say, God, why have you abandoned me? Where are you? We see this in other places too, in the book of Lamentations. Job, who is also called out as, someone who did the right thing with respect to God. And they felt very free to struggle, with the key being that they struggle in God's presence. So I would encourage you to perhaps lean into that a bit more than maybe you have felt the freedom to do, to find some help in articulating your struggles to God in those beautiful psalms of struggle. And maybe that needs to be the focus right now, is lamenting, rather than trying to find the ways in which God might be strengthening your faith. Undoubtedly, God will be doing his work through this. But, one of the things that we've learned in our research is that the way to growth in suffering, the way to strengthening our faith and finding intimacy, is not by trying to not engage with our suffering, but in a way that sometimes seems kind of counterintuitive. It's actually spending time in the struggle. It's spending time in the mess of our reactions and our hurt and, all these things that we experience when we're going through tough times.
We're going to continue our conversation and your calls with Liz Hall after this brief pause. 877-548-3675. That's our number. We have one more segment left, so if you want to jump in on the phone line, this is the time to do so. 877-548-3675. The book is When the Journey Hurts, Finding Meaning in Suffering for Heart, Mind, and Soul by Dr. Liz Hall. Well, and a team. I shouldn't just say by Dr. Liz Hall. There's 3 of the authors as well. We're going to continue our conversation with your calls in just a moment. All right, we're back. We got one more segment, which if you're a regular listener to the show, which I'm sure all of you never miss an episode, it's kind of a lightning round. So for our callers, we gotta hit these a little quick, and so give Dr. Hall time to respond as well. Let's go first to Margaret in Palatine, Illinois. Margaret, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Hi, we have an adult son who is chronically ill, and he was brought up as a Christian in our Christian household. He sees no purpose in his suffering. He feels that God has totally abandoned him, and it breaks my heart. And I try to talk with him, but he won't hear anything from me about it. How can I encourage him and help him?
Super question, Margaret. Good. Hold on the line, too. We're going to give you a copy of the book, When the Journey Hurts, Finding Meaning in Suffering for Heart, Mind, and Soul. And it's just such a tricky thing. Again, that you unpack a lot of this, Liz, throughout here. And you talk about surrender. We talked a little bit about that. Even getting into gratitude, weaving your story into God's story. So, I mean, in this case, it sounds like you moved away from the Lord. Talk to us a little bit about how, in general, you might encourage her in her call, but also maybe weaving your story into God's story.
Yeah, one of the practices that we talk about in the book is the practice of testimony. In my corner of the Christian world, we often talked about testimony as just telling the story of your conversion. But we've learned that in other parts of the Christian world, especially in the Black community, testimony is much more robust. And it has to do with what's really taking whatever's going on in our life and weaving it into God's larger story. And that could be a challenge, but I think that the more that we're able to do that, the more we're able to actually see a purpose in the suffering. It sounds like your son is having difficulty doing it himself right now. The best thing you can do is continue to help him to talk about it and introduce hints of how this might be woven into God's larger story. So that would be my encouragement to you, is to help him to tell his story and to provide nudges in the direction of how this might fit into God's larger purposes in the world.
Let's go to Raj in Oklahoma. Raj, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Yes, as a doctor, I have to tell patients that they have cancer. And Dr. Hall, I was wondering, when you were sitting in your doctor's office and you got slammed with the news that you had cancer, what was the first thing that you did that you found that was the most helpful to you besides prayer?
Wow, that's such a great question, Raj. What do you think, Liz?
That is a great question. Well, my first impulse and the thing that was helpful to me was to contact each of the dear people in my life, family and close friends, and tell them and receive the comfort from them, which I think brings up the importance of community for anybody going through this. One of the things I've discovered in interviewing people with cancer is a lot of times they keep their diagnosis secret from others. They don't let other people know, either because they don't want to distress them or because they're afraid of the kind of unsupportive things that people might do when they're already dealing with so much. And so I think finding a community that will be supportive and not a drain is so essential for going through any kind of difficult life circumstance well.
Let's go to Patricia, listening on K-Wave. Patricia, you're live on the air.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you both. I listen every week. I'm always blessed by it. So basically, I was diagnosed Wednesday with a brain tumor, and I trust God. I have his peace on me. I know he's with me. He knows everything about me. This isn't a surprise to him. But I just wondered what you thought about somebody who just heard it. I'm sure you've heard these kinds of laments before. I'm not afraid, and I trust God, and I feel my best healing is going home to be with him. But I just wanted your perspective.
Gosh, Patricia, thank you for just sharing that with us. That's just where our hearts are with you. I mean, this is just brand new news, Liz. What?
Yeah.
And she also mentioned she's, in a sense, she's also kind of talking about, if it's time to go be with the Lord. Even in that
That's right.
sentence, kind of spoke to some of that. So unpack that for us a little bit. What would your advice be for her? And then I want to come back and talk a little bit about Memento Mori. But first, your advice to her.
Yeah. So again, as Ed said, I'm so sorry for that news, that terrible news. So when we talk about this from a psychological perspective, in terms of meaning making coping, what tends to happen to people right at the beginning is they're just kind of flooded with questions. Maybe they're kind of intrusive thoughts in the middle of the night, which is us really trying to make meaning out of these difficult events, trying to fit it into our world and make sense of our world. And so you might be experiencing that right now. And I would just say have some patience with yourself, that this period of kind of these intrusive thoughts and, the kind of terror in the middle of the night will pass. And then you'll be able to engage in some more calm and deliberative ways of thinking about things. But maybe in this context, it would be helpful with such a diagnosis and with your awareness that death might be the end of the journey, which, by the way, it is for all of us. One of the ancient practices we've been looking at in this book is the one that Ed just mentioned, memento mori, the Latin phrase for remember that you must die. And, Ed mentioned at the beginning of this program that we avoid suffering so well. We also avoid death. We're probably the most death avoidant society that's ever lived. And it turns out that that's not particularly good for us, psychologically or spiritually. When we are at all costs avoiding reminders that we are mortal, we tend to do kind of crazy things psychologically. I won't go into them, but believe me, they're not good. And so one of the practices that's been developed by Christians throughout the centuries has been the more intentional engagement with death, which, guess what? As Christians, we don't need to be as afraid of as other people who don't know Christ. Because even though death is still the enemy and death is not what God created us for, it has lost its sting. It's lost its sting because Christ journeyed there before us, and we are promised resurrection through Christ. And it's not the end of the story because we know that the story goes on after our physical deaths. And so, what seems to be the case is that when we spend time reflecting on this issue, on this really pressing question that we too must die, but we do it with the hope of the resurrection and being with Christ, it can change our entire approach to it. We can move away from that terror that all of us kind of intrinsically feel about the thought of our own deaths, and move into a place where we can continue to live, in fact, live more intentionally than we did before, because we've faced our own deaths. And this isn't just for people who are perhaps literally facing death because of a diagnosis, but it's true for all of us. Whether we're facing it or not, we will get there. Unless Christ returns before that, we all will face our own deaths.
The book is When the Journey Hurts, Finding Meaning in Suffering for Heart, Mind, and Soul. 3 authors, Kelly Kepick, Liz Hall, M. Elizabeth Lewis Hall is what it lists on the book cover, and Jason McMartin all authored this together. I think it's a gift of encouragement for you as you walk through and face suffering, as we all inevitably do. Thank you for Dr. Liz Hall for coming on the program today and for ongoing important work and sharing some of her own journey with us and also in the book as well. Again, it's not a why God allows suffering book. It's more of a kind of a help how God meets us in suffering rather than just explaining it, but how he meets us. And so I want to commend it to you. And again, you can pick it up by going to edstetzerlive.com. Just links, you can see Dr. Hall's bio there, and a link to the book and other resources as well. Hey, thanks for listening. Thanks to our behind-the-scenes team here at Moody Radio. We've got Karen Hendren, my producer, Merle St. James, engineer. Cheyenne's been working the phones. Lisa Gempe, our associate producer as well. To hear today's program again, go to edstetzerlive.com or go to the Moody Radio app. All the resources are there. Thanks for listening.